other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by Robotoyz. More information in a moment.
Everyone appreciates their Transformers collection differently. The most common form of appreciation is through the use of display. To see all of one's figures on a shelf and admire them in a complete form is something only collectors truly understand, even if some people appreciate their collections in different ways.
This is so unsexy!
Others engage in customization. Each toy isn't just a toy, but rather a potential project. Often they'll end up selling them off after to recoup the costs, because the process itself is more engaging than the finished result. And some people just enjoy flipping things back and forth. For certain collectors, there's no rhyme or reason. It's just about the conversion process. That process is partially how I do things, but the review process is also a huge factor as well. By reviewing toys, I engage in the broader context. I examine why certain things are the way they are, and it allows me to appreciate other toys as well through size comparison shots and whatever the f I decide to do on any given day. Sometimes the process of research and review can change my perspective on a figure as well. Occasionally, I might not feel super strongly about a figure, but after taking a closer look, the balance shifts in one direction or the other. Typically, it's down the negative route, as seen with Legacy RC, or going further back, Collaborative Maverick. Shitty toy for a subpar movie only greenlit to provide propaganda for the American military. Who'da thunk it? In that context, it makes painful sense why that figure got reissued with fewer accessories and zero deco changes. However, sometimes it goes in the opposite direction. Occasionally, I'll be somewhat indifferent to a figure, but after doing extra research and correcting a few transformation errors, I'll come to realize the secret brilliance within. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis continues this 4-part series. Welcome to Menasor Month. For the third installment, we examine the third release in Magic Square's Menasor lineup, MS-B11 Overlord. At least this time the 3P name is actually obvious, but whatever, we still calling him Motormaster. Also, I'm realizing the numbering has actually been backwards in the review order, but in my defense, this is the order they released in. Weird, but ultimately inconsequential. Now, one constant with the vehicle modes of this set is that they've all been as accurate to the real-world vehicles as physically possible. Sometimes the proportions get f***ed due to negligence or engineering limitations, but the attempt has always been clear as day. Motormaster takes a hard left turn from this, because this isn't accurate to anything. It isn't accurate to the tune, the toy, or the original vehicle. It's clearly G1 Motormaster, no doubt about it, but it's far less accurate than the previous members of this set. It's actually kinda interesting to see that the Legacy version is closer, given the different release practices, although that version is only slightly more accurate to the real vehicle, and not the toy or tune themselves. And even then, it's only a little bit. Still very stylized. As the last of the three to release, I can see hardcore accuracy fans getting somewhat annoyed at this. Personally though, I never really cared for accuracy. The main reason I discuss it is because I like to dissect why something looks good or bad, and because I know a good chunk of my audience is into this sort of thing. Of course, due to the difference in design philosophy here, discussing how it turned out becomes a more generalized affair than a laser-focused one. And in terms of overall aesthetic, this is still rad. It's definitely more squared off when compared to other Motormasters, which is to account for the somewhat flat aesthetic in robot mode, but there's still a lot of detail here. Once again, Magic Square shows its attention to detail in the front with its multiple layers of paint. Dig how they were able to keep the purple dark, but not too muted, so it stands out enough without overtaking the design on the whole. Also find it kind of funny that this set has 4 different shades of purple paint. Seems a bit excessive if you ask me, and puts into perspective how dumb Dead End's head sculpt is. Moving further down, I appreciate that the bumper section is a different shade of gunmetal to that seen on the light holders, grille, and window frames. And yes, they gave him goddamn window frames, something they didn't have to bother with but went the extra mile for anyway. Extremely unnecessary but greatly appreciated efforts. Also love the rivets below said windows and would have loved more than we have here, but there's a reason they're so subtle. When you end up folding around the leg panels, they all vanish and give way to the smooth toon aesthetic. It's an insanely clever aesthetic swap, and I'm all here for it. Moving to the side, we get the addition of silver now, with the pipes, canisters, and a whole bunch of extra details picked out. The gunmetal makes its return too, picking out the wheel rims. You don't tend to notice from a distance though, so I kinda wonder why they even bothered. Maybe it's to make the wheels blend into the design for the robot legs? Also, you obviously get the classic wind vane Motormaster is known for. Although I wish this was a lot more pronounced, it does serve a purpose, keeping both the individual and combined backpacks clean. Honestly, I think they could have gotten away with a bigger one, but I get why this decision was made. It's hardly something to get too mad at though, and at least you can tell this wasn't the result of laziness, because this vehicle is anything but. I mean, they even sculpted in extra vents at the back, a far cry from from Legacy's clunky old robot chest. Sadly, that does mean they sacrificed the trailer bed section though, because this is clearly just the torso and robot hands chilling on the back. Essentially, they've taken the normal bed silhouette and added a bunch of robot kibble on top. This is actually something the Legacy version does a lot better, mimicking what it's supposed to look like much more closely. Thing is though, I kinda prefer Magic Square's sacrifice to Hasbro's. The torso gels with the design quite well, whereas the upside down robot chest really doesn't, giving way to random hollow sections and exposed panels. I get it, Legacy's torso mode goes through a much more intense transformation in comparison to Magic Square's before time began there was the cube. We're also dealing with a $150 retail Commander class figure with extra trailer gimmicks compared to a $200 third-party Legends figure with no gimmicks at all. But still, this is hardly something to get angry about. If I can write this off as acceptable, I can do the same for this also. Plus, they're both going to be covered up by the trailer anyway, so who cares? Speaking of, the trailer is pretty much the main accessory that comes with this mode. The connection is pretty loose, but given the main point of contact is the chest, I get that anything more comprehensive would have f***ed with the torso detail. Personally, I think this is pretty neat. You get the awesome segmented purple stripe the design is known for in a completely unique shade, as mentioned earlier. There's also a dedicated spot for the con symbol, using existing hinges as a point of interest. Clever usage. There's also a ton of rivets and panel lines that manage to come across pretty well, even with the massive amount of transformation joints. And yes, you can easily tell this thing splits into a billion pieces and forms the skeleton of Menasor, but it still works damn well. As for the controversy surrounding this form of combiner, well, I'll save that for the final installment of this series. I also appreciate they aren't using a bunch of those horrible trapezoidal tabs that plagued Ragnar. There's only 2 of them in the entire set, and even then they blend in pretty well. And sure, the back is a bit messy, especially for something that's supposed to be nothing more than a giant oblong on wheels, but 1, this trailer goes through a lot of transformation to turn into a giant robot, and 2, well, the sign. I think given what this has to do, some of the messier sections can be ignored. And sure, a lot of people will insist it's barely doing anything because it's becoming the whole skeleton of the combiner and cheating the combination. But given what we'll see next week, you can tell those people haven't really messed with this figure before, or Legacy Motormaster for that matter. Now, one complaint I often see here is that it's apparently too long. And yes, it is quite horizontally extended, especially compared to both the G1 toy and Toon. Thing is though, I'm pretty sure trailers come in all manner of lengths to accommodate different levels of driver aptitude and different amounts of cargo. Besides, if it's a choice between too long and too short, sex jokes aside, I think the former works much better here. Much like the vehicle mode itself, it's not accurate in its proportions per se, but it works for the stylization they've chosen specifically. And hey, I appreciate that they went nuts on the rivets now that they actually can here. That being said, it's not perfect, or rather, not all of the flaws can so easily be written off. Firstly, no kickstand. I get why they couldn't really fit them on the torso struts here, but their lack of inclusion still stings. It really limits the display options when you transform just the robot and nothing else. Secondly, the back bumper section really could have used more tabs where it connects to the trailer itself. It's relying solely on the tabs between each half to keep it lined up, and it's just not going to hold over time. Thirdly, the wheels are on sliding joints. Big mistake. Again, the longevity on these pieces is going to be an issue. The bootleg version actually combats this by making them much tighter, and it makes the transformation to combined mode a pain in the ass as a result. It's really sad after getting Masterpiece Gut-Eye Shoki as well, because his back wheels have a sliding mechanism that uses a proper locking system. There's a lot of similarities between the way these two transform, and it goes to show it could have been done, but Magic Square chose not to. Kinda unfortunate. Fourthly, no accessory storage. The swords and guns I'm fine with. The trailer already does a lot between modes. Can't say the same for these 2 panels though. These form either the shoulder stacks or the extra bits on the arms. Given they're an integral part of the combiner, some form of storage should have been included, even if they were just on the back. And finally, and this is what annoys me the most, no base mode. Motormaster was one of my first G1 toys from when I got back into collecting. The base modes are one of the best parts of the Scramble City torso experience, and if you're going to separate the trailer from the rest of the body anyway, a base mode is a must. I've tried coming up with fan modes, but none of them really seem to work. The engineering is tailor-made for the combined mode, and given the amount of options said combined mode gives you, seeing the effort other aspects get, the lack here is a grave oversight. But regardless of the issues on show, this is still a killer alt mode. Stylized or no, it's unmistakably Motormaster, bringing across all the ferocity you could want. And when you take into account the size, the expensive price tag starts to make a little more sense. Not enough to justify the purchase just yet, but don't worry, we'll get to that eventually. Either way, yes, there's a lot more this alt mode could have done, but it's already doing a ton to begin with, so it's pretty easy to forgive. If you're wondering whether the alt mode is better than the Legacy Legacy version, I mean, come on, it's pretty damn obvious. It's honestly not even fair to compare these two. They're not even in the same ballpark. They aren't even in the same city, or on the same continent, or on the same planet. The only real things Legacy does better is the addition of a base mode, the accuracy to the real-world vehicle, which still doesn't make it better than this version, and the inclusion of the Zohar, which might not be a good thing come to think of it. Either way, it's a stunning vehicle from a visual perspective, and easily tangos with the other members. Accuracy-wise, it may not be what you've come to expect, but quality-wise, it most certainly is. Anywho, size-wise, it works well enough. It's technically a little undersized, as most truck formers are, but it kinda makes sense considering what they have to do with bot mode scales. Besides, increasing vehicle mode size while keeping robot heights the same doesn't tend to work well, and I doubt it would work here given the aesthetic swapping. As for comparisons with the KO, this release feels a lot more slapdash in comparison. With the exception of bootleg Dead End who can get this feels the most like a knockoff. Not only do you have to deal with the wonky tolerances, and not only have all the pinned joints been replaced with Phillips head screws, which just look ugly. Sorry customizers, but in this particular instance where the original mold wasn't designed for it, they just do. But there is so much goddamn mold flash on this thing. It's even on the wheels, which is absolutely unacceptable in my book. Still, there is one improvement. The silver is much more shiny, although sadly the camera doesn't pick it up that well. I don't think that's enough of a reason to get the unofficial version though, especially given the changes made to the combined mode. Ah well, no difference to me. I don't own the bootleg, I'm just comparing for your benefits. And for my benefits, I think it's time to move on. Conversion time! Right after a quick sponsorship break. As everyone and their mother could have guessed given how the last video turned out, today's video is brought to you by Robotoyz. You probably know them, I definitely know them. People know them as one of Australia's leading Transformer-themed toy retailers, specializing in all manner of products from official and unofficial companies. While this figure has obviously been off the market for quite some time, they've always got some spicy Legends boys on show for purchase and pre-order. If anything tickles your fancy and you've yet to give them a shot, make sure to use the code DrLock 10% off for a discount that works exactly the way you'd think. Maybe if you're waiting on the new age version of Menasor, you can use that. I don't know, just a thought. Whatever you use it on, go nuts. Anyway, enough dawdling. Back to the review. So when it comes to the individual Magic Square vehicle to robot transformations, I really thought this was just going to be more of the same. I expected Motormaster to just be an average transformation because I genuinely thought Dead End was the best it had to offer. Turns out I was dead wrong. This transformation is god tier. It does things that I have never seen on any Legends Transformer since, and I really wish Magic Square would do more stuff like this. So the first thing you want to do is untab these panels from the sides here, which will give us some clearance for later, and we can also take this top section off like so, which will unlock the entire torso section. As for said torso section, it essentially swaps out the wheels for the arms, so what you want to do is unpeg these sections like that, come around to the back and separate the arms like so. These rotate outwards and around the backpack like that. What you want to do is take these modules and rotate them in and rotate them in and rotate at 180 degrees like so, and like so. Head rotates up and the wheel bits rotate inward. This section is on a separate rotation to everything else, and you can also bring in the panels, or I suppose the tabs there. And then you've got 2 slots there and 2 tabs here, and the whole thing's supposed to click together. And this is really the only frustrating part of the transformation, because getting everything lined up in there is a bit of a pain. There should have been a better way to do that, with these also tabbing into the chest. But as it stands, it's not hateful. Anyway, you bring the arms back like that, and of course they head down. Rotate the arms into place like so, and they sort of bend outwards like that. You get this panel all the way up, and then this panel rotates separately into that, which covers up the hollowness. You can see it covers it up there, and rotate the wrist into place. It's a very simple but very effective little panel folding technique, and another thing I'd like to see more often on other Transformers. That's basically this entire figure. It does great stuff that just is so underutilized in the space. Anyway, you then take this hinge and rotate it around, and that clips into the legs. So now you got the legs, yay. You need to separate them to transform them. You bring this foot section out and use the double hinge to get the fake foot out. Come around to the wheel and rotate it around 180 degrees so that it's not touching the ground. You take this panel and rotate it in on itself to switch it from the front of the truck to the fake windows. This rotates back into place, and then to lock it into place, this back panel will now close all the way to the back instead of just to the side, and you bring the canister around like that. This transformation is genius, and I really wish the Legacy version took more ideas from it. The way the Legacy version transforms just feels unfinished in comparison, and it's really frustrating. I look at what a Legends figure is able to do, and I'm just a bit disappointed in the end, because this is amazing. Anyway, last but not least, you collapse the torso into itself with the double hinge and rotate the head around 180 degrees, and we are done. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's just a truly awe-inspiring transformation. It's got a lot of the same ideas as other Magic Square releases, but they don't add too many of them. It doesn't feel like an overcomplicated figure. Doesn't necessarily feel like a new age one because the engineering is very different, but it does feel like the best that Magic Square can do. It might just be one of the best Legends transformations I've come across. It's just that clever. And you can kind of see why this set is so expensive. I mean, yes, we have the combined mode with all of its stuff anyway, but with this transformation, they've also spared no expense. It's also brilliant. I don't know what to say, man. This is some good shit. Now, before we jump into gushing about how awesome this robot mode is, I need to dispel some of the baggage this figure is saddled with. Motormaster bears the brunt of the combiner complaints, and this is due to three main reasons. First, only the cab transforms and not the whole trailer. This is wholly inaccurate to both the G1 cartoon and toy. Secondly, the trailer essentially forms the skeleton of the combined mode, even more so than the legacy version. A lot of people dislike this. They consider it cheating and not a real combiner. Finally, the price. As mentioned earlier, this set costs 200 Aussie dollary dues. That's a lot of money, especially for a Legends figure. When actually broken down, it's not too crazy. The complete price is $360. That seems like a lot, but you can see the progression of third-party Legends combiners as engineering becomes more complex and mature. However, it's somewhat difficult to truly break down the price without examining the combined mode, so we'll have to put a pin in that for now. It's also really difficult to break down the skeleton arguments too, so for now let's just focus on the separated trailer situation. It all really comes down to scale. If you're going for toy scale, Motormaster should tower over the others, but nobody wants to go for toy scale. As much as I criticize the idiocy of the Sunbow charts, especially in relation to Legends class figures, it wouldn't really make sense to have Motormaster be ridiculously large in comparison to everyone else. When you've got a trailer this big and you're dealing with figures this small, an all-in-one transformation just isn't going to work. I've only ever seen such a system done successfully once, and that was on a Fans Toys Masterpiece-alike figure. We all know the folly of downscaling Masterpiece-level transformations to Legends size. It just doesn't work. And on top of that, Fans Toys' decision may have caused the combiner to fail due to weight issues. With all this in mind, yeah, I can see why they left a separation. It's the same reason Legacy did it too, and predictably I'm seeing the same complaints being thrown around. If the fact the trailer doesn't transform with the robot is the only thing putting you off, honestly I wouldn't worry about it too much given the transformation and robot mode already. Now if the other issues are your main concern, well, just wait a bit. Maybe next week I can convince you otherwise. Okay, is that explanation done? Good, because I can finally start orgasming over how sexy this looks. They've sort of taken a similar approach to Dragstrip, stretching the Sunbow aesthetic over a stylized design. The Sunbow model for Motormaster is, suffice to say, pretty bad, so I'm glad they've gone this route. The main difference is that instead of putting it over the toy proportions, because that would look silly, they've put it over a more heroic style. The end result is unbelievably photogenic. This is seriously the best Motormaster in my collection, although I guess that's not saying much because I only really have 3 overall. The torso takes all the best bits from the Sunbow design, only now it's wider, curved, and angled towards the bottom. As a result, he goes from a kid wearing a cardboard box to an absolute beefcake. I would have personally loved some extra paint on show, but I get that would have been a pretty heavy deviation, so I understand why they didn't do that. The head that sits atop it is also pretty good too. It's been shrunk quite a bit to avoid it from looking too ridiculous, but it still retains the bucket aesthetic. I will say I prefer the Hasbro version in comparison, but that's to be expected because mainline face sculpts rarely miss. That's the only thing that really beats out the Magic Square version though. Everything else just doesn't compare. I mean, look at these legs, they're gorgeous. They've brought back all the best bits from the animation model whilst ditching the worst parts, such as those awful sticky outy bits. Ew, no thank you. Go back to the same hole that I shoved the word cromulent into. This is where we see the aesthetic swapping. Most of the rivets and other forms of mechanical details have been hidden away. The front grille is now inside the legs, and the side details fold away onto the backs. It's a marvelous way of doing things. They also, for no reason at all, busted out the awesome inner leg detail that hasn't been seen since the first episode in this series. Super stoked to see its return here, even if its inclusion is wholly unnecessary. Also adore the use of the faux cab pieces on the feet. I was actually a bit worried these wouldn't make the final cut, since the prototype photos were a little confusing. Some had normal feet whilst others had these. Really glad we got this style in the end. I know a lot of people find this stupid, but I find that stupidity endlessly endearing. And hey, if you so desire, you can leave the truck cab as is. It negates the ankle tilt, but it's an option. Not sure why you would though. Honestly, I really wish the Legacy version looked this good. It just ends up feeling half-assed in comparison. And I know it's a mainline release limited by budgets and all that, but seeing how far they went with Rodimus, I wish they pulled out the big guns again. Also, quick thing about the ankle ankles. Although this guy stands really well, if you ever find yourself needing more support, the canisters can move with the ankle tilts. It's completely optional, but I love that it's an unintentional feature. Even the arms turned out well here. All of the toon details are present and accounted for, albeit with a more angular look. They even mimics the extra circle with the transformation pin. That's actually hilarious. Again, I would have loved some extra paint, but I get that would have been controversial. And bringing it around the back, Christ, even the backpack is as clean as a whistle. Once again, I wouldn't have minded a bigger backpack to facilitate a more pronounced wind vane, but either way, this is quite the engineering feat, especially given what he has to do to fit in the combined mode. And the articulation, Jesus Christ, the articulation. It's all here. Wrists, ankles, waists, ab crunches, double elbows, double knees, butterfly joints. You can even tilt the head down if you so desire. Yes, it's a little odd they used ball joints on the shoulders while the rest use universals, but me, this blows everyone else out of the water. On a figure of this size, I can't think of a single thing they could have added. Yes, I'm a little bit annoyed the ab crunch is below the waist swivel and not above it, but when you see everything this figure does with its transformation, me, this is class. And then you bring in the weapons and the poses get even more pizzazz. He gets his traditional G1 sword and cartoon-styled gun, and these are sculpted really well. The sword has been given a bunch of extra details at the hilt, and the gun has been made to look much blockier, putting it in line with New Age powered Convoy's gun. And the coolest part is these aren't the combined weapons. They included 2 sets of weapons for 2 separate scales. You just know if this was done by the usual Magic Square designer, they would have fucked this up somehow. Honestly, I can think of only one complaint with this mode. Unfortunately, the designers couldn't help themselves, and as such, the head has the old Magic Square peg effect. No ball joint here, just a singular peg that pops off with relative ease. Really sick of them doing this. No other company on the planet uses ports this lazy. I've seen 3D printed fan kits that use better joints than this nonsense. Honestly though, that's really the only part that can truly be considered bad. Yes, there are annoyances in the alternate mode, and there's one part of the transformation that bugs me, but the robot mode? Nothing. And not only does it just not have flaws, but it also rises to the call of duty and takes risks that pay off. It's a truly inspired figure that I just can't get enough of. It's probably one of the best standalone Legends figures in my collection. Although, to be honest, I didn't always feel this way. The more figures you collect, the harder it is to appreciate all of them. Occasionally when you receive a bunch of figures at a particular time, some of them fall through the cracks. For instance, I got Legacy, Motormaster, Cyclonus, and Blitzwing on the same day. Upon receiving these, I gave the least amount of time to Cyclonus, as I had already spent plenty of time with the previous version. It wasn't until I went back and messed with him more, applying stickers and such, that I came to appreciate his hidden qualities. This happens quite frequently, and me reviewing figures is ultimately a method to combat that. By engaging with figures I wouldn't normally mess with for the purpose of size comparisons, I'm privy to things I missed the first few times around. But sometimes this doesn't necessarily work, especially in the case of combiners. What's the first thing you want to do when you get the final member of a Gestalt set? You wanna combine it, that's what! I know a lot of people that deliberately won't combine a figure until a week after they get the last one. I do not have such restraint. Why wouldn't I want to combine a big beefy robot and bask in its resplendent glory? As such, the first time round, I ended up glossing over Motormaster. I came to the premature conclusion that he was the weakest of the set by virtue of just being a vehicle for the combiner engineering, both in a metaphorical and literal sense. Matter of fact, I wasn't even in the habit of transforming him properly. This is how it's supposed to transform, and this is how I was doing it for months and months. Matter of fact, you can see this mistransformation in the KO comparison shots I took. This single mistransformation acted as the catalyst for my apathy. Why should I care if the designers didn't care about hiding away the hands? In fact, initially I was only thinking of making 3 videos in this lineup instead of 4. Motormaster was going to be shoved into the combined mode episode as an afterthought, because I woefully incorrectly assumed that's how the designers saw him. It's only recently that I've gone back and examined him in closer detail, all for the purpose of doing this review series. This is when I realized this figure was amazing. This is when I realized he had insane articulation, a transformation that stands above even most New Age figures, and a vehicle mode that is a display piece in itself. This is when I realized the kilometer-wide divide between this and the Legacy version. This is when I realized this series should be 4 videos instead of 3, because this is when I realized this might just be one of the greatest Legends figures of all time. Anywho, let's end this off with a quick size comparison with the KO. Motormaster is the only one that comes anywhere close to the size of your standard deluxe. So again, if you're thinking of getting these to scale with Generations figures, just don't. It's dumb. Really dumb. But the figure as a whole certainly isn't. Time and time again, I've seen these cuboid torso fellas pumped out with little care, since he's going to embed himself in the combined torso and never be seen again. What's the point? Magic Square Menasor is the rare case where this isn't the case. It's a release of both impeccable style and immeasurable substance, one that knocks all three aspects out of the park, being vehicle mode, transformation, and robot mode. It embodies the fun factor of Legends to the highest degree, and yet still acts as a gorgeous display piece. I wish Magic Square could consistently release figures of this caliber, but well. The real world is cruel, and we can't always have what we want. This also puts into perspective why this set is so expensive. Due to the accessories specific to him, I could see a standalone Motormaster release going for about $90. Not 100 like Agamemnon, and certainly not 120 like Ragnar, because that price is bullshit, but 90 seems about right. This leaves 110 for the trailer section, which takes away half of the budgetary concerns. As for the rest, well, we'll have to save that for next week. Just another story for another time. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your collecting stories below. Have you glossed over figures and come back to them at a later time? Did you find them better than you initially thought, or were they worse than you anticipated? And also, have I convinced you on this set yet?
Why are you still talking?
Because I want to get you to see, and I'm almost there.
If not, well, there's always next time. Until then, remember, there's a context for everything. See y'all next week for the conclusion.